Can I thank you for coming along and joining us this morning to listen to and hopefully learn a little bit about the Chilean education system. And our purpose this morning is to share some information, and hopefully you'll be able to gain some insight that will give you, some understanding of how Chile has moved forward as an education powerhouse in the South Americas, and maybe learn something new that will help us in the Dubai context here. We have a very full 45 minutes for you this morning, and I'll introduce you to our team of people via a most extraordinary piece of filming, and that's via the video clipping. So just sit back and enjoy this for a moment.
It's been an enriching experience to be part of this Lighthouse Project representing the government in Chile. I thank KHDA for creating this opportunity to enable us to study the best practices in the field of education across the world. Thank you.
Hello, this is La'fضل, School President of Lighthouse International School. Me and my team have been working on the Chile project for some time now. We're going to share with you our experience. We learned a lot. There's so much exciting to share with you. Thank you very much.
Oh, this is Marcus from Lighthouse. And I think it's a wonderful journey. We like to go around this Lighthouse Project is any education conversation, which I think has perspective to really if anything, I think it's going to be a big plus point for humanity. It's so wonderful that you can work with the education institutions across the world.
Good day, how are you going? My name's Jake. I'm from Dalmar Private School, and pleased to be part of this wonderful group that's put together this Chilean experience for you. I hope you enjoy it.
Buenos dias. My name is Julian Williams. I'm the principal of Raffles School Academy here in Dubai. I've been spending several months now actually working with my colleagues here at the Chile Lighthouse, finding out about how Chilean education reforms might be useful for our experience here in Dubai. It's been a fantastic journey, not least in being able to network with our colleagues and finding out just how the ideas around the world can help us improve education here in Dubai. Enjoy.
We have a number of features, and as you see in that particular clip, there are a couple of principals missing today as a result of the frantic busyness of life in schools. But certainly their thoughts are with us as we present this presentation this morning. What we have is a little YouTube clip now, just to give you a bit of insight into Chile itself. Then we're going to follow it up by a couple of poster presentations, just to give you a tidbit of some of the factors influencing the Chilean educational program. And then we're going to follow it up with a bit of a conversation. We've got some students from two schools, and they're going to answer the questions and give a bit of a flavour for how the learning we've had this morning can affect the Dubai countryside. And then we have a special treat. We're going to talk to or listen to a Chilean presenter give us a bit of an overview to finish with. So that's basically how our session is going to unfold this morning. So with that, let's just introduce to you very quickly something about the Chilean background.
Since our organization was formed in 2008, we have played a crucial role in changing the Chilean education system. And we've worked hard on important structural reforms, such as the Quality Assurance Law for preschool, elementary, middle, and high school. Law, which guarantees free admission, prohibits profit, and student selection among schools that receive government funding. The Teaching Career Law, which raises admission standards for those studying to be teachers, implements a new teacher evaluation system, and improves teacher salaries. The Quality and Equity Law, which establishes an open, merit-based system to choose school administrators. Our roadmap, the education reform Chile needs, was included in the President-elect's policy agenda. We received a grant from the European Union to lead the Latin American Education Network, which is made up of 14 leading civil society organizations throughout the region. Through direct intervention in schools, we have improved learning outcomes for more than 65,000 students at over 150 vulnerable schools in 23 Chilean cities. Feedback from this on-the-ground work has allowed us to provide Congress with realistic information about Chile's education system on the 30-plus occasions in which we have been called upon to provide expert testimony. Just 5 years after our organization was born, one of our founding students, Valentina, and our former executive director, Adriana, were named Chile's Vice Minister and Minister of Education. We've been growing as we worked, and we now have 500 monthly donors, 80,000 adherents, the strongest social media platform among Chilean education organizations, 380 press mentions per year, and a professional environment that was recognized as #2 on Chile's Great Place to Work list. Not too bad, huh? And that's not all. Our work comes into sharper focus when we take a look at our organizational model, which includes nonpartisan policy research, capacity building in vulnerable public schools, and a communications platform that empowers the community to join the national education conversation. Since our organization was born in 2008, we have played a crucial role in changing the Chilean education system. And
what's taken place is that they have engaged in a number of reforms, and what we'd like to do now is just to share some of those with you, and before we move into the student session in a moment. There are 3 posters around the room, and if you look at your passport, we've given you a bit of a opportunity to take some notes by filling in some thoughts. There may be some questions that you might have as you hear the 3 presentations in a moment. Just take a moment or two to fill that in, and of course I've given you nice and early the feedback sheet if you'd like to complete that as we go along, so to make it a little bit easier for you before you, finish the session this afternoon. So let's have a quick look at the political agenda, or some of the key issues around decisions made by the Chilean government over a period of time. This particular poster looks at the one key factor, and this key factor is about the emphasis and consensus in politics and policy. And if you look very closely, there are 3 spelling mistakes, or 3 typographic errors. You might be able to find them as I share the story with you. But first and foremost, there's been a resurgence in education in Chile itself. And that hasn't come about because somebody woke up one day and decided that they needed to change things around. It came about as a result of an ongoing groundswell of conversations and communication. Like most countries, there have been ebbs and flows in terms of the political agenda in their countries. This particular country, as you know, had a very dominant regime for a number of years, and then in the late 80s had a significant change. During that initial period of time, they had a stable view, and that is there was no real educational change. It was a process where there were senators for life. There was no real conversation or discussion entered into what's taking place. And then as things unfolded, there was this whole notion of pushing for a decentralisation framework, and that's how it took place. And after a period of time, there were a number of key people came to the table saying there is a problem. There's underinvestment given to the Chilean education system. There was a lack of standards and regulation around that. And what they found is that due to the ongoing globalisation of learning, that we had a number of external benchmarks that come into play, that people realised that their system that the Chilean system wasn't being successful, it wasn't doing things. And then there became a bit of unrest around the notion of trying to improve the educational system. The notion about policy continuity, once they moved away from Pinochet's regimented approach, they went into a democratic group. We had a variety of parties come into play to try and help the conversation and build the demand for learning. And so what we tended to see take place was that there is more collaboration in terms of walking towards the main focus, and that is to improve the educational system. And then you had all these different groups that had different ideas of how to put it together. So through this consensus and through the rigorous lobbying across the different parties and such, you were able to have a more richer policy development, and the framework around that enabled Chile to have a more focused approach. And it was unilateral across the country accordingly. The notion of having a democratic approach to it is that there were more players in the conversation. It wasn't just about solidarity, it was really about having the experts come into play. So when you get into the whole notion about feedback and accountability, the Chilean countryside went on an educational research framework. They were opening up the doors, allowing themselves to be more informed by what's happening outside and around the world. And they were trying to adapt a more focused approach to their programs. The evaluation of what's going on inside schools, inside systems come into play. But I suppose one of the real issues that they grappled with during the late 80s and then early into the 90s was the notion of a market-based education framework. So they started to develop the competition between schools. The introduction of the voucher system, which still has its remnants in Chile today, enabled them, from their view, to try and ensure that people were forced into making best decisions, for the schools. And having a market-based approach, they felt enabled them to be able to raise the standards accordingly. But of course the research around that since has indicated that there is some social implications with regards to the voucher system and in terms of also an economic framework to it. But overall, to where they are today, the standards have raised, the educational framework has improved, and the role of the government and the policy development over a number of years has enabled them to continue the investment across the whole countryside at this stage. The other thing that came out of the policy arrangement is that they went on a massive networking of school framework, and so that while the state-based and the private school framework got together and evolved out of this era, one of the big things that come out of the studies and the research that unfolded was the notion of networking for schools. And I draw your attention, if you wanted to follow a bit further, in terms of a document called Scaling Up in Chile. So this gives a good example of how interaction between schools, not run or led by a political agenda, but by the focus of trying to improve learning. And that's the tying thing to do it. And as the more schools network together to arrange evaluations and feedback accordingly, then the student achievement in that particular country rose accordingly. So in a nutshell, that's that particular component. It's a bit of a dry component, but certainly it is the foundation for where Chile is today, and enable them to have the infrastructure to actually make some pretty big decisions around the provision of teaching and learning within that country. So with that, I'm going to hand over to the information around teacher quality. And so if you'd like to just turn your chairs around, Nameska at the back will be able to share her part of the story.
Okay, now coming to the the next and the most important issue in the form when we talk about education is the focus on teachers and teaching. When we look at the education scenario in Chile over the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a sea change in the quality of teachers or the teaching or the education scenario itself that has come about because of the reforms that have been brought in to improve, to bring about a quality of teaching for the students. Now, as a first step, they introduced a first statute way back in 1991, which brought the teaching as a profession, teachers as a profession under the ambit of the Labor Department, and then which helped improve the conditions of employment for the teaching profession. And then, as the next step, they brought it. They took the Praxis 3, which is a teacher preparation department of the George Washington University, where they have prepared a framework for the teachers. And along with the Charlotte Danielson's model of framework for the teachers, they designed their own good teaching framework. Now, if you look at the main domains of either the Praxis 3 or the Charlotte Danielson's model, it covers planning and preparation, the classroom environment, professionalism, instruction and assessment strategies, where all of these, with effective professional development, all of these were given, were conducted to the teachers across the country, and then a national performance evaluation system was set up to ensure that there is quality teaching that is happening in the schools. At the same time, there was an annual plan for the development of municipal education to ensure that public schools get where the majority of the students are, they get the best of the education that is possible. And at the same time, the national performance evaluation system, if you see, has been linked, the growth of the teachers has been linked to their performance. Teachers who have taken initiative to come up with innovative projects were rewarded, and to ensure that there is a sea change in the quality of teaching that is coming up in the education scenario over the years. Okay. Now, in the passport, if you see, we framed a question over there where we've asked you to compare and contrast what is it that that is different, or what is it that we can take from here to put it in our Dubai context, or what is it that we have seen across all the countries who have presented here, which we can adopt in Dubai to take it forward as part of, to improve our standards in this PISA and TIMSS and the national agenda as such. Okay, thank you.
So very good morning to everyone present here. My name is Vaibhav Pabreja.
And I'm Mahatula.
And we're both representatives of GEMS Modern Academy, currently studying in grade 11. So today we're here to give you a brief introduction and show you a little presentation of the Chilean education system, wherein Chile as a country has greatly progressed and developed over the past 2 decades, over the past 20 years. So, as it is evident through the chart or the table displayed here, back in the day, around let's say back in 1980, a country like Chile, which was so socio-economically backward and did not have enough resources, has actually jumped in their PISA scores by an average of 35 points in each of the 3 sections. And this goes without saying that the government has put in tremendous hard work and determination to achieve these scores and achieve what it has today. So let me just pop you guys a question. What do you think are the reforms or the policies that the government has taken, or the steps that the government took in order to reach their standards today? There are 4 main aspects to this. The first of which is are the programs for the educational improvement and the integration of technology and innovation. The second is the professional development of the teachers, which included the improvement of the working conditions, the special allowances and the incentives that were given to the teachers. as well as the awards that the teachers were given for their brilliant performances. Thirdly, there was a great transition or a reform in the educational curriculum, and the curriculum itself was completely transformed and modernized to suit the time and age it was present in. And finally, the introduction of the full day classes, which was proposed and introduced by President Frey in 1996. And this in turn resulted in an exponential increase in the number of students present in schools. Over to my colleague Maha.
So now that Vaibhav's given us an idea of what the main aspects that improve the education system, we're going to look at the timeline in which it took place. So firstly in the 1980s, which was the first wave of reform, the main objective here was to increase the coverage of education for both primary and for secondary education. So if we look at student assessments, there was SIMSE, which was a national evaluation system in place, where the state assembly would form an exam that would make the students have a level that they had to reach. Now, when we look at the second wave of reform in the 1990s, this is when there was a change in the aim of the education system. They wanted to improve the quality and the equity of the system. So here we're going to change to the third wave of reform, which was in the late 1990s, where teacher professionalism was important. Here, teachers were given different incentives, and they were provided with
special allowances through the government, and this really motivated and influenced the teachers to work harder. And this point can clearly be seen in the fact that the younger generation that was actually entrusted in the teaching profession was increased by a total of 70%, and that, I think, was a brilliant advancement in the education system.
And now currently Chile is working on integrating their information technology so that they can reach further goals and progress even more. We believe that Chile has prospered and they've reached a point where they can influence other countries, and Dubai has a lot to learn.
So to finally end with a quote, a great Chilean educationist once said, "Progress in education quality has not been driven by a single factor, but rather it is an amalgamation of a number of things on the systems approach." Thank you.
Okay, so now just to reiterate, set the close the session, giving you a bit of a political background to the changes and the unified focus by the country. Yeah, we've got one more session, then you can dive into questions, which is great at this stage. So what we're doing is providing some input to share with you, to give you the context. So the political background, we know that teacher quality is the number one factor in improving student learning, and we've just had a bit of a quick overview of the different reforms, different programs and strategies that Chile put into place. We now come to the exciting part of our program, where we're going to have a question and answer session led by students in our schools. So if you champions might want to take your seats, Mr. Julian will introduce you and share this next 10-minute period.
Okay, well, good morning, and I'm going to get things underway straight away. There was a question I know that was going to be asked from the audience. Please do feel that you can join in with this session. I'm going to first of all start by allowing our students to introduce themselves. You've already introduced yourself, but if you could do it just once more, because I think what they did was absolutely fantastic in terms of that. Let's have a round of applause. I think that's really good. Okay, so please introduce.
My name is Vaibhav Papreja. I'm a student of James Modern Academy, and I'm currently studying in grade 11.
My name is Abhishek Ashok, and I'm a student from Raffles World Academy.
My name is Shikhar Chaudhary, and I'm from Raffles World Academy.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here and consenting to be here. I have some questions that have sort of emerged over the time that we've been working together as principals, and this is the first one. I can throw it open to anybody, and also members of the audience, if you want to contribute, please do. Okay, a commitment to funding in support of improved teacher training and professional development opportunities. That's one of the key aspects of the Chilean reforms that we've heard about. Commitment to funding in support of improved teacher training and professional development opportunities. What do you think about that? Is that and the important thing about this part of it is not simply to reaffirm exactly what the Chilean reform is, but how far that's going to be applied to our experience here in Dubai. And one of the reasons why we're doing it this way, by the way, is about student voice, because student voice here in Dubai, I think, is absolutely essential in terms of our educational reform. So let's start off with RWA.
To be quite honest, it's a brilliant idea. The only problem is with professional development is that as students, if we can't see it applied to our learning in school, then what exactly is the point? To be honest, it is a highly theoretical instead of practical, and so application into our learning itself is quite difficult. And there's a statistic which says that I think a year after a professional development takes place, teachers are only able to recall and implement around 2% of what they have gone through in these sessions.
Okay, any reply?
I personally feel that these teacher training programs, they're a brilliant idea as you stated, but I think they're gonna work a long way, because once these teacher training programs are introduced, I mean, every person has a capability to learn and to keep learning. And that's what I feel it is. So it's going to be a brilliant learning experience for the teacher. And if the government, it's stated that there'd be a commitment to funding, yeah. And if the government could introduce funds for the integration of technology, as we can see here, I mean, this is a brilliant facility. If it could continue to do that, I think these teacher training programs will actually pay off, and students will be able to relate better to the teaching experience provided by the teachers themselves.
Anybody else want to comment? Or anybody from the audience? What's your view on professional development? Does it work? Is it going to be something that we can put lots of money in, but what in terms of the impact? How can we measure it? Yes?
Can I ask, was the PD, professional development, compulsory in Chile for the teachers, or was it voluntary?
Voluntary.
Always just voluntary. Okay, but there wasn't a minimum
But teacher
standard?
training, of course, compulsory.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there was a accreditation and a license
Correct.
standard. Okay.
Right.
Is
One of the problems we often find also with schools, of course, is that you can spend a lot of money on professional development, sending teachers to different courses, but how effective is that in terms of the impact, as I think you mentioned? But in-house training, of course, I think is de rigueur. We need quite a lot of that. That's really what works pretty well. Do you have anything you want to say?
I feel that the professional development could have an impact on students, but it could end up being a waste of time and money if it doesn't really impact students in the classroom and their learning.
So it's about measuring that, which you think is important. Was there anything you wanted to add?
It's important that the teachers do receive a certain certification before they teach, but it should be something that's implemented from the school, like that the students can see.
Okay. We've also heard of the importance of the commitment to standardized testing, international benchmarking. So standardized testing in key subjects like language, mathematics and science, PISA we've already mentioned. How important do you think that is going to be in terms of driving improvements in educational outcomes? Does anybody want to answer?
Can I answer?
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel these standardized assessments, for example, the PISA, these standardized assessments are extremely important because first off, these assessments are uniform. So you have a uniform testing system wherein different schools, privately and publicly owned, they can relate to, okay, so why do we say that a score like 384 is not up there, but a score like 442 is a brilliant score? So these scores actually show the schools, okay, so this is our scope for improvement. This is our scope for improvement, and these are the steps we have to take to reach a particular goal or target. So I feel these assessments actually are an extremely good way to help the schools set a target for their education system.
Anybody want to counter that?
Like, to be honest, the standardized tests help to a certain extent with Chile, but with the UAE there's actually very little practical application, because one of the biggest problems that the UAE itself faces is the fact that there's no standardized test for Arabic, whereas Chile has a standardized test for Spanish, which is the first language there. And moreover, these standardized tests, they don't actually paint a complete picture of the individual. They're far more general to the school as opposed to the individual. And on top of that, they do not exactly tell you how you've developed as a person. they simply quantify what you know.
May I
Yes.
add on that, please? I don't agree with what he has said completely, because when you talk about international assessments, which are benchmarking assessments, it's not possible to assess a particular age cohort of students across the world all at once. When you say it is standardized, you have to do it at a particular given time, because the characteristic of a standardized assessment is reliability and validity of it. So if you don't do it at a particular time, you lose on those characteristics of a standardized assessments. That is why statistically you require data people to ensure that the sample that's of students who give that assessment are perfect enough. So it's the ministry or the education agency in every country that has to ensure that the population of students giving that assessment are thoroughly taken in as a random sample. And that information that you get out of the assessment as an outcome is what informs these education agencies what is the next step or what are the kind of reforms that they need to look at. Because that's the main purpose of having an international assessment in place.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much. To add on this on standardized testing, yeah, sure, go ahead.
The thing is, right, from this,
Right. No, go first now.
Please, and then after you, I might like.
Sure.
The thing is, right, from a student's perspective, quite often, we see these tests as just an excuse to get out of class, and quite often we don't take them seriously. That's the reason that I believe that they shouldn't be used as a benchmark, because you don't have time to prepare for it prior to the test, and we don't necessarily want to be there or take the test seriously.
Frankly speaking, benchmarking assessments for which it's not that you have to prepare for the test, otherwise there's no meaning.
Sure.
It is the school's curriculum and what you do in school as a student that prepares you for the test automatically, and that is what these assessments assess.
I would
Are your schools and education systems preparing you enough?
I would agree with that. I think the main drive here is whether or not the testing system, standardized testing and PISA and TIMSS, for example, can become ends in themselves. Is that really what education is about? That's the question I think that is before us, yes?
And I agree with the point that the standardized assessment is not about the content. There are more skill-based assessments.
Yes.
So we're talking, that's why the approach in general in our school should change toward that, teaching these skills and being more evaluative and higher level of thinking. But I still agree with the idea that we need to subject our students to samples and to these type of questioning. And even we need to align our curriculum and our exams with these types of questions in order to reach to a specific point.
Yes.
I think there's a very pertinent question, and I think you raise a very, very, very valid point, is that there's a lack of meaning and purpose when it comes to these tests, when it comes to students. Students do not understand, this has not been promoted amongst them. Why would anybody do something which is meaningless? You have to sit for a test for 2-3 hours and do your best, and how do I benefit? And I think there's a great deal to be done in education from schools and authorities to promote the idea and to make students aware of what is the purpose of this. Because the purpose is so abstract that students do not understand this, and I entirely agree with it loses its validity.
Yes.
Students don't understand why.
I think the emphasis really is testing for what purpose. If it's about attainment, probably less important than actually using, as we were saying, a benchmark test in order to measure a start point and then to measure progress. However, the key question is, are the standardized tests that are being used really appropriate to meet the needs in a context in which the students actually are? So that's
you see, it loses its context if the students do not understand why they're being tested. Because for them it's a test. Purely to test. Am I right or wrong?
Well,
and then there's no more purpose, and I think you have to go back to the philosophy of all the testing, and you need to coach your students as to why should this be done? What is the short and the long term goals? And I think as schools we tend to forget that, and then the test loses its validity.
I think I've got probably room for just one more quick question. Now, this is actually about the introduction of educational vouchers that we've heard about. It's one of the key platforms of Chilean education reform. How might that actually be applied in our context here, and should it be? It's a very different context. Anybody want to answer that? Educational vouchers, good thing, bad thing? What do you think?
in context of Chile, I think it was a good thing that they did in Chile, so it allowed a lot of people to receive the education that they required. But in a situation like Dubai, I don't think it would work as much.
Why not?
People can afford education in Dubai. In Chile, back in Chile, it wasn't that everyone is of the same level. Here, there are variations, but everyone can receive basic education.
Thank you very much. Yes.
To add to my colleague's point, back in Chile, when the voucher system was first introduced, research shows that there were protests in place by students themselves, and so this basically it divided the students into two categories: ones that performed brilliantly and ones that didn't. Although it motivated students to take up the challenge and actually strive to work harder, I think the integration of a voucher system here in Dubai, it wouldn't be the best of ideas, as I think it wouldn't work in relation to the way it worked for Chile.
RWA, any points you want to raise?
I agree as well. I don't think it can be implemented in Dubai because there are many private schools in Dubai, which makes this a bit unfeasible.
One of the things that is very interesting about the current president of Chile in looking at education reforms is her commitment, in fact, for not-for-profit schools. Both you guys actually come from schools that are for-profit schools. Okay, we need to say that. What is your position? I mean, is there a position, should there be for-profit schools, or should there be a determination by government to say, no, education is not for profit? What do you think?
Like in Dubai in particular, like profit is the main motive for schools, and as such it would be really difficult for the government to try and cut back on that. So I honestly don't think it would work.
30 seconds to go. Anybody in the audience want to give an input to this one? Profit or not for profit? If there were a government directive that says, no, we need to phase out for-profit schools, how many people here might actually agree with that? Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for your patience and for thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We have one more component to go before we finish our session, and that is to listen to a Chilean. So here we have Miss Danielle, who is a PhD student, and she's just going to give her the personal context of living and her understanding of the Chilean educational process at this stage. So we okay, thank you very much, Mr. Hart.
It might actually be an opportunity, though, for anybody to comment on, what you've heard this morning, whether you think there are aspects of the Chilean education reforms that we can actually bring to learn from and apply in our own context. Yes.
I just want to ask regarding this national evaluation exam. So it happens by the end of grade 12, I believe, like a unified exam that everyone is subject to. So maybe that would be one of the things that we can do if it works.
I think the interesting characteristic of Chile, as many countries, they have a national curriculum to follow. From our perspective, if we look at the Dubai context, the conversation might be around, what does a national, formal leading exam across all school curriculums would look like, and is that manageable, and is that productive, I suppose, leading into.
Not in Dubai.
Actually, just to add on that, as we all know that KHDA has the very national agenda parameter for us, as of which we have a choice of 5 international benchmarking assessments that we are supposed to take. So in lieu of that, is it possible that KHDA brings about a standardized test which measures progress of schools towards the national agenda targets that's set for us? So probably they could partner with one of the international agencies who provide such assessments and create an in-house KHDA based assessment that our schools can take, so that it becomes more unified.
But again, as you mentioned, the variety of the schools.
No, exactly. As you correctly pointed out, these assessments may not be content-free, so it's curricular free and it is skill based.
So it ensures preparation towards achieving.
It's very interesting actually if you take some of those choices. I like the idea of choice, by the way.
Yeah.
I'd rather not like it that the KHDA determine for us exactly what benchmark tests we do. But there is a difference, for example, in the kind of results you might get from doing IBT to say GL, PTS, and so on, the English and maths tests. And sometimes there's an inconsistency there, which of course we have to manage very well. What we'll do now, though, is we'll turn to the remaining minute or so of the film with the Chilean commentator.
G-U-E-S. Okay, hello, my name is Daniela Figueroa. I'm a Chilean PhD student in UCL Institute of Education, and I want to talk to you about the Chilean education system, particularly focusing on stories of success and also the main problems that we have faced during this journey. The first thing that I would like to say is that Chile has a really interesting story about education, especially considering that we had a really hard period during a dictatorship that lasts it was between 1973 and 1990. So it was a period of 17 years where education changed a lot. And actually it was harmed by the measures that the government of that time took regarding the provision of education, the role of the state about education, and the need of education for everyone. Hopefully, well, as there's no time for going deep into this story, I will tell you about the story before the dictatorship that started in the 90s. Since then, the focus of the government was on recovering enrollment in education. So it was in coverage. Thanks to the measures that were taken, the coverage of the education system in Chile is more than 90%. It means that more than 90% of kids in Chile can go to school and enjoy the benefits of being educated, which is great. Also, we have some focus It's a focus on the poorest kids in the country. So the money that is provided by the state is given more strongly to them. I mean, the amount of money that each month the state gives to education goes to the poorest kids in the country. So it benefits them from different points of view. I mean, it's not only about provision, but also about quality. It has been a really successful experience, but it has its more, like I would say, dark side, because we do have a good rate of kids going to school and so on, but the measures also have provided difficulties in terms of segregation, also in terms of the decrease of public education, and also our results have been stagnant, I mean, relying flat. There are not bad results in comparison with Latin America, but we still need to improve that. So the new focus at the moment is on quality and equity, and we are working towards improving those by implementing a new reform that helps teachers and teachers to improve their prospects in terms of career by
by having the opportunity to access to better training, initial training and continuing professional development in order to improve the quality of education. So, I mean, if I would have more time, I would tell you a little bit more in detail, but I think these are the main topics that we can rescue from our history. Thanks very much.
Okay, so that's Ms. Danielle Lopez, a student in Chile, sharing her thoughts on the education system. So that brings us to the end of our program. Can I just thank you all for being part of it, and I thank the team of principals and KCA representatives, in particular Ms. Amar, who has been the backbone of our group. She's the only one that's attended every single session of our meetings, and she's coordinated our group very well, so I'd like you to thank her. Don't forget that there is the evaluation form. You've got your passports for your notes, and on the outside we have a graffiti board. If you just want to add a few notes around your thoughts on our session this morning, that would be wonderful. Thanks very much for your attendance. Enjoy the rest of your day.